Good evening, guys. My name's Mike. This is All Things Fish. Thanks for tuning in to day 9 of the 12 Days of Christmas contest and giveaway. Now, we're playing catch up a little bit, so if you missed day 8, I'll drop a card up there. You can click the link. As always, all the days are down in the description below, so you can click the link, catch up, see what you missed, and hopefully learn a thing or two. Today, we're going to focus on live foods, in particular, my favorite place to get live food culture information and source starter kits for your live food, and that's Paul Peer at That Fish Guy. So Paul Peer has an excellent website, which I'll link to there and in the description below. And he's been doing it for years. You can find him on Facebook as well as his website. You can see him on Aquabid, and he offers up a ton of information as well as super cheap starter cultures to get you going. And if you're not familiar with live foods, generally speaking, most live food cultures are cheap to get started and extremely cheap to run. And it's a perpetual food source. It doesn't take a lot of input to get a lot of food out of it, and for the most part, they're pretty easy. So let's talk about some of the different types of live foods that are out there. Now, in the specific link below on Paul's website, there's an abundance of information. I'll help point you in the right direction to get to the answers for some of these questions. So, question number 1. What kind of worms are Walter worms, banana worms, microworms, and vinegar eels? Question 2. For feeding tiny fry with very small mouths such as betta fry or potentially rainbow fish like the Chilathriana alleni way up there, which 2 of these 4 worms would probably be the best choice based on their size? He goes into a little bit of information about each worm and why you may want to feed each worm, and then he gives you an excellent step-by-step process on how to culture each type. For culturing Walter worms, banana worms, and the microworms, what food does Paul recommend cooking and allowing to cool to use as a media and food source for the worm culture? Now, these 3 types of worms are cultured quite similarly. You just use a different starter. And when culturing Walter worms, banana worms, or microworms, what temperature range should the culture be kept at? Do you need to keep them in a cool refrigerated place? Do you need to heat them up a little bit? Or can you just kind of keep them at your standard room temperatures that we're comfortable at as well? Vinegar eels are cultured a little bit differently, and they are quite possibly the easiest live food culture that I've ever kept. When starting a vinegar eel culture, what ratio of cider vinegar to water does Paul recommend using? And then he goes on to explain a little bit that once you get the proper mixture in your container, he uses 4 or 5 peeled apple slices. Why does Paul suggest peeling the apples prior to placing them in the culture? Once you get the culture started, you gotta let it cook for a little bit and build up a sufficient population before you begin feeding it. About how long does it take for a vinegar eel culture to mature before you can start feeding it? And then once it's time to feed it, you've got a container full of worms. And with regards to vinegar eels, you got a container full of worms swimming around in some water. How does Paul filter his vinegar eels for feeding his fish? It's a pretty simple process. There's a lot of ways to do it, but Paul breaks down his method. So let's see if we can dig that up and kind of explain that a little bit. And finally, question number 9 for day 9 of the 12 Days of Christmas contest and giveaway. What vegetable does Paul suggest placing in water to start an infusoria or paramecium culture? Now, infusoria and paramecium are extremely small critters, unrelated to the 4 types of worms that we talked about, but we're talking about live foods, and paramecium and infusoria are an excellent live food for freshly hatched fry. So let's take a look and see how Paul suggests starting an infusoria or paramecium culture. Specifically, what vegetable does Paul recommend using? Of course, he has a ton of other information and offers several other types of food cultures on his website, and I encourage you to explore that and try one out if you haven't already. Now, this will conclude the 9 questions for day 9 of the 12 Days of Christmas contest and giveaway. If you have any questions, comments, suggestions, etc., feel free to leave them down in the comments below or include them in your answers, which you'll email to mike.allthingsfish@gmail.com. Thanks for your time. I hope you're having a good one. And until tomorrow, we'll see ya.